Right now, my eye drawings look like this, flat and boring. But I want to draw crazy and super pretty anime eyes like Mika Pikazo and Tama draws. The way these artists draw complex eyes is something I want to learn. So how do I get closer to them? Well, the same way you learn everything else in art, by studying anatomy, practicing lighting, and referencing other artists. One thing about my head drawings that I'm still not happy with are my eyes. I know how to draw things that vaguely look like eyes, like here's the eyelid and eyelashes, this is the iris, and this is the pupil. But I don't understand on a deeper level how to go from this to this. Oh, these are good enough, you can just wing them, I might hear someone say. But the inner artist in me is saying, nay, clamoring to learn. They're probably the most important part about drawing the head, besides the head itself. After all, they're the window into a person's soul. One of the biggest reasons why I want to improve my eyes is because they're one of the biggest hallmarks of an artist's art style. When it comes to anime art, eyes come in all shapes and sizes. Some look simple but clean, while others are complex monstrosities that you can't help but admire. I'll admit, I have a soft spot for the over-the-top, ridiculously rendered eye style, and I'd like to move from my simpler eye rendering style closer to something like this. I'd say my art style is pretty simplified right now, and that my current approach to drawing eyes matches that. But I'd like to expand my toolkit to be able to draw both more realistic and more stylized eyes. There's an argument to be made that I don't need to do all of this, because of art style cohesion. But just because I learn new ways of drawing eyes doesn't mean I have to draw them a certain way every single time. But for now, let us begin the anatomy lesson. Time to pull up the books. Oh, what's this? Ah, new art video. On eyes, that's some pretty good timing. Varmar. The name sounds familiar. Alright, I'll watch it.
Basically the color part of the eye.
Huh.
This is the most
That's
interesting
interesting.
part because of its complicated nature. Essentially,
It's not stealing, it's Before actually learning new techniques to drawing the eye, I want to plant the seed in the back of your minds that eyes are just one part of the head. You can't really draw an eye without considering the placement of it in the skull and on the face. Well, actually you can, but most people drawing eyes are drawing them because they want to add a face to their faceless body drawings. I say this now because you have to change how you draw the eye based on what direction the head is facing. We'll get to this point later. Moving on to the actual eye, let's start with the skull. You'll notice two big holes in the head right around here. In real life and in most art styles, the center of the eye socket is at the halfway point from the bottom to the top of the head. Let's pop in an eyeball here. You'll notice that the eye looks like a ball, hence eyeball. Now, it's not exactly a perfectly spherical shape, but for 99% of drawings, a simple ball is good enough. When you look at the skull from the side, you'll notice that the eyeballs aren't completely hiding inside the skull. They kind of stick out a little bit, forming a round curve. Covering the eyeball are the eyelids. Just like the eyeball, these are rounded when viewed from the side. On the edges of the eyelids are the eyelashes. Together, in real life, these keep little particles like dust out of your eyeballs. But for us as artists, they serve to make the face look pretty. On the inner edges of the eye is this pink triangle-looking shape, the tear duct. Out of everything on the eye, this is the most optional to draw, depending on art style. Special mention goes to the eyebrows, which aren't technically part of the eye, but their placement and rotation affects the overall expression of the eyes more than any other facial feature. Or maybe I'm just talking out of my ass and it doesn't affect the eyes themselves, just the overall face. Well, eyebrows have the word eye in them, so I'm still counting them in. Alright, cool. That's all the parts of the eyes that we're gonna cover, so let's get to drawing. Bonus round! Eyeball anatomy! What? You thought we were done just because we covered the big shapes on the head? We all know the reason why you clicked on this video. It's not because you didn't know the eyelids existed. No, it's because eyeballs are the funnest part of drawing the eyes, and you either A, wanted to see me suffer trying to draw them, or B, want to suffer less when you draw them yourself. The sclera is the big white part of the eyes, also commonly referred to as the eye whites. The iris is the colored circle in the middle of the eye. This is where most of the coloring magic with the eyes will come in. It actually digs into the eyeball a little, like a concave bowl, and you need to shade it like it is. If you've ever wondered, like I have, why most artists draw the top part of the eye darker than the bottom part, even though the top should be catching more light, this is why. The pupil is a dark void that rests on the iris. The size of the pupil can actually change. It expands in low light conditions to let more light in, and contracts in high light conditions to let less light in. It's also affected by mood. The pupil expands when you're happy or you're looking at something you like or love, and it contracts when you're stressed out or you're anxious. The cornea is like a convex contact lens that causes the eyeball to slightly bulge out. It covers the iris and pupil. It's transparent, so the only time you'll see it is in the highlights, when it catches light. Since the cornea is convex and the iris is concave, these will have opposite reactions to the primary light source. The shaded part of the iris is where the cornea will catch the light. In practice, this means you can add highlights to the shaded part of the iris. This part really confused me until I researched it for this video. But if you're in the same boat and you learned something new, why don't you hit the like button? I'll really appreciate it. Moving on, the limbal ring is a darker part of the eye that indicates where the cornea connects with the sclera. In practice, this is pretty much implied by the line art for the iris. It's kind of like real life line art. Younger people tend to have thicker limbal rings, but older people tend to lose them. So if you want to make a character look younger or older, you can thicken or thin out the line art respectively. Bonus round. Anatomy of the iris. Oh yeah, we're still not finished. The iris itself can also be further subdivided into two circular zones, one inner and one outer. The outer zone is the ciliary zone, and the inner zone is the pupillary zone. And I'm assuming it's named that because the pupil is in this zone. Now these two zones behave like a camera shutter, but for the pupil, and they're why the pupil can expand and contract. They're separated by a ring called the collarette. If you've ever wondered what that small ring on the iris that some artists draw is, that's your answer. There's a video by Ricebrush that overviews exactly the type of eye drawing that I'm going to replicate. And it's called 5 Levels of Drawing Stylized Anime Eyes. Let's pick up a pencil and start drawing some eyes. And I really do mean a pencil. Here's my sketchbook. You thought I was only a digital artist? Well, you'd be right, I don't usually draw in here. But I wanted to switch it up a little. Ricebrush's video details, well, 5 levels of stylized anime eyes, going from most realistic to completely crazy. I thought it would be a little easier for me to draw the more realistic stuff with a pencil and paper. I actually added one more level to this video, which is level 0, completely realistic eyes. Or at least as realistic as I could draw with my current skill set and a mechanical pencil. I didn't exactly have a regular drawing pencil to draw with, and I wasn't gonna spend the 10 minutes it would take to buy one from a local store just for a sketch. So it is what it is. The first thing I did was draw an eyeball. This is kind of the foundation for the eyes. Like, obviously the eyeball is the eye, but when people talk about drawing eyes, that also includes the stuff around the eyeball too. Anyways, since this is traditional art, I don't have an undo button like I'm used to, so I kind of bungled my first attempt at drawing a circle. The second attempt looks a lot better though. Notice that the shading on the sclera is the inverse of the shading on the iris. As I mentioned before, the iris is a concave disc that digs into the eyeball. So the top plane of the iris faces away from the top plane of the eye whites. On the other side, the bottom plane of the iris faces the other way from the eye white. What this means is that with a light source coming from the top half of the eye whites is lit up, while the top half of the iris is in shadow. And the bottom half of the eye whites is in shadow, while the bottom half of the iris catches some light. Also remember that the cornea sits on top of the iris and curves with the rest of the eyeball. So the top half of the cornea is going to catch and reflect the light, creating that highlight in the middle of where the iris is shaded. I also added in a squiggly circle in the middle of the iris to represent the collarette, and I drew a bunch of lines in the iris radiating out from the pupil to represent the fibers of the iris. I don't really know what they're called, whatever. Lastly, I darkened the line around the entire iris to represent the limbal ring. Okay, you know how to draw the eyeball now? Good. Let's add facial features on top of it. The eyelids cover the eyeball. When you combine the two of them in the front view, they will form a sort of hexagonal shape. I describe it as hexagonal instead of round because, well, it's a little easier to form eye shapes using rounded lines instead of one big curve. You can roughly divide the eyes lengthwise into thirds. At the edges are the corners of the eye, and at the 1/3 and 2/3 points, you can change the direction of the eyelids. Typically, from what I've noticed, the top eyelid has a very steep angle from the inner corner to the first third, then it levels off. The bottom eyelid has a steep angle from the outer corner going to the second curve, and then it levels off. This forms that almond shape that realistic eyes have. Now, people have differently shaped eyes, so this might not apply to everyone, but it's an easy to remember shorthand for me. Wait, is it actually a hexagon? You can probably simplify it even further to a parallelogram, yeah, whatever. Let's rotate the head a little bit. I drew in the brow ridge. A bit of the nose and some of the cheekbones help give these rotated eyes some context on an actual face. This is why I studied the skull before doing this video, so I could do stuff like this. But if you're new here and haven't studied the skull, the eye areas are indented a little bit compared to the brow ridge and cheekbones. This is why when you rotate the head, you can connect a flat line from the brows to the cheek without touching those sensitive eyeballs. The point I'm trying to make here is that the face is not flat and neither are the eyes. The eyes kind of bulge out from where they're positioned in the eye socket. You can see it more clearly in the drawing's right eye, your left. The eyes are not flat. Say it with me. Eyes are not flat. Again! Eyes are not flat. Because they're a spherical shape, you can't see the far side of the eye. This effect is really pronounced in this side profile picture. Here, we can't see the inner corner of the eye at all. Wait, what's this? Did you notice that bulge? Oh, that's right, you can see the spherical shape of the eye very clearly from the side view. The eyelids will follow the contour of the eyeball, going from roughly the middle point of the sphere on one side to the middle point of the sphere on the other side. One thing that is slightly more prominent with this eye is that the eyelids are also a 3D shape. They're not drawn flush with the eyeball, but they have their own thickness. This means that both eyelids have both a top and bottom plane that can catch light or cast shadow. Most of the time, you don't have to worry about the small bottom plane of the top eyelid, or the small top plane of the bottom eyelid, but they are there. Actually, in this drawing, I added in light just underneath the eyeball to represent the top plane of the bottom eyelid. Realistically, this part would probably be covered in shadow cast by the eyelid itself, but who cares? It looks cool. Oops, we're talking about stylization, and we're supposed to be on the realistic eyes. Well, actually we're done with the realistic eyes, so we can go up to stylization level 1. Rice Brush's video starts here. Now this level is technically stylized, but still very close to realistic. A lot of Western art styles are at a level 1 stylization actually. The eyes might be a little bigger, and eyelashes might get simplified, and the coloring might be a smidge more cartoony, but otherwise, most of the features of the eye are still there and very recognizable. Yeah, there's not much else to say that I didn't already say in level 0. Level 2! Now we're really starting to move into anime territory. Eyes are getting bigger, and the iris is getting easier to color in. That recognizable almond shape of the eye is still there, but the angles might be more exaggerated at this point. We're starting to resemble anime-shaped eyes a lot more now. I started running into some trouble as I rotated the head. I want to draw the eyelids the same way as I did for levels 0 and 1, just with maybe thicker eyelashes or something, but they look too similar. And if they look too similar, then what's the point of stylizing even more? Well, here I start exaggerating the eyelid openings, so that looks less like a flat Pac-Man shape, and more like, well, half an anime eye. But only half, because again, the eyeball shape is going to cover the far half of the eye. Level 3. This level is definitely anime, and as you'll soon see, probably the most anime out of all the levels. I'd say most anime artists are at this level, or at least the ones I follow. The biggest difference between level 2 and level 3 is that the eyelashes might start getting separated, especially on the inner corner of the eye. At this point, the top eyelash might also absorb the outer third of the bottom eyelash, which usually leaves the bottom eyelash as just a straightish line. Try saying that 3 times fast. As a side effect of the eyelashes getting separated, often in anime styles, there won't be any line art separating the eye white from the surrounding skin. I really start having trouble with the side view at this point, because again, I want to change how it looks like from level 2, so I let the inner edge of the eyelashes be visible again. This isn't realistically correct, but it's perfectly fine in an anime art style, normal even. But in my opinion, it kind of flattens out the eye. I guess it just boils down to personal taste whether or not you do this. The iris and pupil are at their most simple coloring here. A flat color and hard shade is enough to sell the point that this is an eye. You can render the eyes more complicated than just that, of course, but you don't have to. Which ties into my next point that something interesting happens at level 4! So far, we've been talking about how eyes have been slowly getting more simplified over time. From realistic at level 0 to pretty cartoony at level 3. Well, the complexity of the eye as we go through the levels is actually an inverted bell curve. And we're about to start adding details back in. Okay, we're back in the digital world now. For the most part, the anime eye shape has been solidified, so now it's just the coloring details that change. At this point, I can't really draw the eyes anymore, so I looked up some references for tips. I came across this Japanese YouTuber, Reika, who draw eyes in this really pretty way, and I want to emulate what she's doing. Let's watch her video and see what we can take out of it. Okay, it's in Japanese. Fortunately, we have captions now. Well, this is gonna be painful to read. Fortunately, you don't have to understand what she's saying, as long as you can still draw along. And draw along I did. Now, you might be wondering whether or not I can speak Japanese. Well, the answer is yes. Nihongo wa jouzu ni hanaseru? Anyway, here's what I drew after watching her video. I wrote down some notes too while following along, so even if you can't understand Japanese, you might get something out of this video. This is definitely more painterly than I'm used to. If you've noticed from my previous artwork, I tend to use very harsh lines and shading. I get my gradients from literally using the gradient tool on everything, or using a soft airbrush, or the blur tool. Okay, I'm not strictly a hard shading only type of person. It's worked so far, but I really do want to get a more painterly vibe in my pictures, so I started using Clip Studio's default round mixing brush here. This led to some minor variations in the colors as I was painting the eyes in, which, when bundled with the other techniques I'm about to mention, are really going to take the eyes to the next level. My next note is that if and when you're drawing the iris rings, you can draw the rings and pupil closer together if that side of the ring is closer to you. Wow, I do not know how to explain that properly. Okay, let's just look at this example. For this left eye, I drew 2 iris rings. In this perspective, the inner side of the eye is closer to us, and I drew the pupil closer to the inner edge of the rings. Remember that the iris is a dish that goes into the eyeball a little bit. Thanks to some funny 3D form magic, if you draw perfect circles for the iris rings, this is what's gonna happen when you view the eye at this angle. The next note is to use a lot of sparkles. Like a lot. Okay, this is pretty self-explanatory. And optional. Next is to be sparing with off colors. If you have purple eyes, you shouldn't be adding a lot of red and blue to the main shapes, because it could cause confusion on what the actual eye color is. Which is fair, but also I think it's kinda cool if you put wacky colors in the eyes. So I may or may not follow this in the future. I guess it depends on the piece. Next, the main iris shade should be very dark. Like, it can be almost black. You can add brightness and color back to this shaded part of the iris through a glossy layer that represent reflections on the cornea. Remember the cornea? You didn't space out during the anatomy part of the video, right? Don't worry, I'm not gonna judge you. As long as you didn't click off the video, I need that audience retention for the almighty algorithm. Oh, by the way, big thanks for sticking around this long. Final note, you can highlight the highlights. Okay, that's worded weird. Let's go with, you can outline the highlights with either black or red to give some extra oomph and warmth to the eyes. This serves to, well, highlight the highlights, give it an extra sprinkle of color. And with that, we can move on to Wait, there's a newer video by Rika. Okay, I like this thumbnail, going from kind of flat to something really lively. Oh hey, that's pretty much exactly what I'm trying to do. Okay, I'll watch it. Oh, she has actual English subtitles now. Wait, oh come. There are 6 main points in this video. I'll summarize them really quickly. If you want a more detailed explanation, I recommend watching her video instead, straight from the source. 1. Eyes should have a max of 1 to 2 large highlights. Any more and it can cause visual clutter. 2. Highlights don't have to be pure white. You can make the highlights some saturated color, or make it slightly transparent and experiment with layer modes. If you're using Clip Studio, I'd recommend Add Glow, and Hard Light. 3. The pupil doesn't have to be centered inside the iris. In fact, it probably shouldn't unless the eye is looking directly at the viewer. But you can sort of make small adjustments to where the eye is looking by changing the position of the pupil. 4. The base color should be darkish, so highlights can pop out more. Oh, your eyes are light colored? Well, too bad. Unless you want the eyes to look kind of washed out, shift that color picker down. 5. The outline of the iris should be thin, or even optional, unless you know what you're doing, in which case make the iris outline as thick as you want. 6. Base colors should be desaturated. If you like having a lot of saturation in your eyes, you can just add a clipping layer on top of all of the iris layers. Set the layer mode to overlay, and then use a soft airbrush with a really saturated color on top of it. Here's the before and after. Nice. I also tried to draw the eye here in a side profile view. These over-rendered anime eyes look kind of weird with the more realistic head shape, so I'll change it to be a bit more anime. Okay, you know what? Never mind. I think I just suck at drawing side profile heads. Oh, I guess that's a future video idea. Let's go back to talking about level 5. We have reached eye mastery. The artist can draw a realistic eye if they want to, but they don't. Just like level 4, we're going to analyze the eyes of a stylization master. That's right, it's everyone's favorite, Mika Pikazo. I swear, you can't go 4 art YouTube videos without someone mentioning her. And I'm going to be part of the problem now too. I mean, can you really blame me? Her art is incredible. And her eyes are just that perfect blend of realistic features and over-the-top rendering. I have no shame in attempting to copy her. So let's take a pair of eyes from one of her drawings and try to get something that would be even 50% as good as her. I'll be happy with that. It's gonna be tough, but if I can do that, well, that was easy. Am I missing something here? Rendering these eyes were actually easier than Rika's eyes. There's a lot less emphasis on gradients and soft brushes. No need to even use complicated layer modes. I mean, it kind of seems like she just default G-pens all over the eyes. Like, what? To illustrate my point, let's look at the highlights. Like, zoom way in. For this eye, I'd say there are 2 main highlights. The white one on the left and the yellow one at the bottom. Mika Pikazo put orange outlines around them, and so did I. If we move back to Rika's eyes, she often draws a red glow around her highlights. We can simplify the glow to a simple orange outline here. In fact, a lot of the techniques we practiced during Rika's eyes are present here, but simplified. What gives? I thought we were gonna go crazy here! That there would be some super duper secret eye rendering technique that only top artists have the ability to... Oh, I understand it now. It all makes sense. Drawing skill is not about being able to do complicated or hard techniques. It's about knowing those techniques and then choosing to use or not use them to fit your style. Of course, art is an expression of one's soul. If you choose to express yourself with realistic techniques, that's beautiful. If you want to simplify so you can draw faster, easier, or just because you like the way it looks, you have all the power in the world to do just that. I was so caught up in learning new techniques that I lost sight of the topic of this video, which is eyes. How ironic. This picture by Mika Pikazo is pretty tame by her standards. Surely something that's crazier like this will offer new insights. Alright, here we go. What? That was it? I did the exact same thing as I did the last few eyes, and they look pretty decent. I mean, yeah, obviously they're not going to be as good as the eyes in the original picture. but that's because I just don't have the number of drawings down to back this up. Yeah, there's a star in these eyes now, but that's just the same thing as a funny looking highlight. Like, this is all the same. I thought we'd be drawing full-on galaxies in the eyes by this point. Alright, you know what? No, I don't need other artists. I can do this myself. There. No, I'm not happy. I'm mad. I'm angry. I've had enough of drawing other people's art. It's time for me to— Welcome back to Wivyrn Draws. On this episode, we'll be painting some eyes on a self-portrait of me. I went ahead and skipped all the boring stuff, so now we just have this faceless monstrosity as a blank canvas. From this eye study, I've made an eye drawing process with a few steps. Depending on stylization goals, you can omit a few steps or details of the eyes. Step 0. Draw the eye shape, aka the eyelashes. This is step 0 because it's not really part of the eyeball and you can actually move the step towards the end after you've drawn the eyeballs if you're clinically insane, like live 2D artists. Step 1. Draw the shapes of the eye whites, iris, and pupil. This is pretty straightforward. I hope I don't have to elaborate on this one. The iris should be a desaturated color since you can add saturation later on with an overlay layer. You can shade the eye whites too during this step, since the iris will be kind of doing its own thing for the rest of this process. But I forgot to do that here, so you'll have to wait to see that. Step 2. Draw eye shade. As discussed in the previous sections, the form shadows would be normal sphere shading for the eye whites and inverted for the iris. This ignores the cast shadow caused by the eyelashes and eyelids, which you can define with a simple multiply layer over both the eye whites and iris. The iris shade should be a very dark color to help bring out the base color you chose for the iris. Step 3. Draw 1 to 2 big highlights, usually somewhere in the iris shade. These steps so far are the minimum required amount to get something that looks like a typical anime eye. You can stop here, but if you want to go even further, you can follow the next steps, which are actually less steps and more like a checklist that you can tackle in any order. Step 4. Add pupil decorations. You know, the whole star eyes, heart eyes, diamond eyes, box. You don't have to make the pupil a different shape, but maybe adding a glow in the center or lightening up one side of the pupil, like a highlight, is enough. Step 5. Add iris ring / collarette. Definitely very optional, but it is an option. Step 6. Add gloss to the cornea. You can add gloss with a transparent add or overlay layer to the shaded part of the iris to give it some detail and lighten it up a bit. You can also add gloss to the unshaded part of the iris to highlight it even more. You can add detail to this part by erasing some of it to represent that the eyelashes are catching some of the light. Step 7. Add iris fibers, aka those line things that radiate out from the iris. It's up to you to choose how to draw them, how dense to draw them, and how thick to draw them. You want to be careful with how detailed you want to go, because if you go too far, it can conflict with Step 8. Add sparkles and smaller highlights. Awesome! That's what I wrote in the script. Step 9. Add outlines to the highlights. Usually, this will be a warmer color, but you can experiment with this. Step 10. Add saturation with an overlay layer. I like using a soft airbrush and using a darker and cooler color for the dark side of the iris, and a lighter and warmer color for the light side. Now, by this point, we're done rendering in the eyeball, so now it's time to Step 11. Draw the rest of the eyes. Now, you can kinda do random stuff to your eyes as fits your style. For this one, I chose to exaggerate the limbal ring by adding a thick outline to the iris with these little spoke thingies. Why? I just think it looks neat. You can do your own thing here. Now, when I say draw the rest of the eyes, that includes rendering the eyelashes, eyelids, eyebrows, eye wrinkles, eye spy, and that one weird dent I see some artists include that I think indicate where the eye socket of the skull starts. I know I kind of skipped over a lot of details at this stage, but that's because these details aren't really what I was trying to focus on, and I don't really care. Well, here's the finished piece. Yeah, I know it's very draw the rest of the owl too, but this is a video about rendering eyes, not rendering everything else. I'd say I still have a long road to go to get my eyes looking as spiffy and clean as Rika or Mika Pikazo's artwork, but now that I've written down a process and even made an entire video on rendering eyes, I should be able to start streamlining my process more over time. For the overall picture, I also tried out a new rendering style using Clip Studio Paint's default mixing brush. This is in contrast to my usual style, which is to shade using very solid chunks of flat colors. I did this because I want to add more texture to my drawings, and I thought attempting to paint would add some sort of real-world variance to my coloring. I don't know how to digitally paint, and I was just kind of winging it. I will say, when compared to the last drawing I did, I like the last one more, but that one is also significantly more stylized and something that I was pretty comfortable with rendering. This series is all about taking me just a bit further beyond my comfort zone, and my art will likely take a temporary hit while doing that. But I know it's also just that, temporary. If I keep practicing, and practicing well by reflecting on what I did well and what I didn't do well, I should be able to incorporate new techniques into my style over time. Some drawings might not pan out in the short term, but I'm pretty excited to see where I'll be and how my art has changed months and years from now. Did you want me to go more in depth on my eye drawing process? Well, I'm not going to. An in-depth tutorial is reserved for a future video idea. I have to keep the content factory running after all. What, you thought I started making YouTube art tutorials out of the goodness of my heart? No! I'm holding these ideas hostage until you subscribe to me! Actually, the real reason is because this is literally the only drawing I've made since doing this eye study. And I have no idea if anything I did in this video is gonna stick with me later. Once I optimize my process, I'll consider doing it, but only if you hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe. By the way, eyes are only one part of the head. A very important part of the head, yes, but also only the second most important part of the head. The most important part of the head is the head. So if you want to learn how I improved my head drawings, watch my last video. Might get something out of it too, if you want to level up your head drawings. That's it from me. Later.